Hello, how are you doing? My name is Roger Gitonga, and I will be taking you through this fantastic video touching on audits and assurance preparation and answering techniques. One of the few things that I've normally found as a challenge is actually trying to ensure that the students understand first and foremost the paper, but also at the same time how to answer questions from different areas, and we will be diving into that in this particular video. Stay on, plug on, and I'm sure you're going to love this video. Now let's move, let's start. Name is Roger Gitonga, as I said, an expert tutor at the ACCA. Now with section A, what we want to know here, the first thing here is the structure. There are three questions referred to as OT cases in the paper, and you do appreciate the fact that each question contains one scenario, 5 objective test items worth 2 marks each. So that would automatically give you about 15 questions. And if they're 2 marks each, that's about 30%, isn't it? Now, which area is tested in this particular area? Well, one, it's hard to predict. Wow. But come on. Common question areas could be from the audit framework and regulation. We might find questions from professional ethics. We might find questions from corporate governance. We might even find questions from reporting. Wow. So, I mean, it could be from anywhere. Now, there will also be a mix of knowledge and application questions allocated to each case. So I do need us to appreciate the fact that it's not just about your application, but you have to also know your stuff. You need to appreciate the fact that you can't neglect any part of the audit paper. Now, what is a special fact for me here? A maximum of 2 questions could be knowledge-based questions per scenario. A maximum. So I want you to imagine you have 5 questions, and out of those 5 questions, about 2 of them maximum could be purely knowledge-based. Now, Roger, what do you mean here? We'll be looking into this. We'll be looking at a few examples just to give you a very good, clear understanding of what I'm trying to mean. Now, what about time management? Well, we've just said that there are 30 marks or 30% in section A, and I want us to imagine that for every 1 mark, we should ideally spend 1.8 minutes, which means in total, you should spend about 54 minutes in section A approximately. So learn to allocate an appropriate amount of time to each objective test question rather than to individual objective test items. So I would rather say if one case has about 5 questions, I'd want to allocate per question rather than spending so much time on per case rather than spending so much time on per question. So per case, how long should you take? If each case is ideally 10 marks, you should take about 18 minutes, isn't it? So you look at it as the fact that, one question within those 5 questions could take you a minute, another one could take you 3 minutes, but at least ensure that the total is 18 minutes per case. Now, let's look at an example. This is borrowed from the specimen exam on the TestRich platform. I mean, you can go check it out. I want us to look at an example of a section A question. As you can see here on your left, you have the scenario, and then on your right, you have what do you have? You have the question, you have the requirement. Now, I want us to look at a few things. First and foremost, what do you see there? In relation to the audit engagement partner holding the role for 8 years and her son's offer of employment with Maldini Company. In relation. So what are they giving you? Context. How does this really help you? Well, before we can move on, we can now highlight the what exactly? The requirement. What are we being asked for? So I now know the context, but what is the requirement? The requirement is asking me which of the following safeguards should be implemented in order to comply with the ACCA's Code of Ethics and Conduct. Now, as you can see here, we've been given the context of the engagement partner and her son. So I know that could be probably that first paragraph there. Now, sometimes as you're reading through the scenario, what should you use, my friends? What should you use? You should use the highlight function. This will really help you to capture specific parts of the question so that you're able to answer the question faster and more efficiently. Now, what do you also notice about this? Well, first, there's a bit of knowledge that can help here. This, getting the right choice would be looking at the fact that you have the knowledge and the application. So if I was to read this scenario and I see here that the partner has been with the firm, has been in the engagement partner for 8 years, knowledge would tell me remove that person from the team. But at the same time, I appreciate the fact that there's application to this scenario. But you see here, a good mix of the two would easily get you your answer. And there's your answer there. And you'll be able to finish it very quickly and move on to the next question. Now, let's look at this other one. What do you notice about this second example? Well, first and foremost, when I look at that part, I appreciate the fact that it says here, in line with the ACCA Code of Ethics and Conduct, which two of the following factors must be considered before the internal audit engagement should be accepted. Now, for me, what I pick up from that is that first and foremost, I have to be particularly careful with the fact that this is a knowledge-based question. But two, there's another thing I want us to highlight on the requirement. If you don't read it well, you might miss it. You have to choose two. If you chose one right and one wrong, then the answer would be wrong. You have to get both choices correct. So, what would help us here? Now, you see, they've mentioned concepts of the internal audit, really, and I can see that the internal audit function in the scenario. But I realize that as much as there's a mention of the internal audit function, this particular question is a knowledge-based question and might not necessarily draw too much in terms of the can I say the application aspect here. So I might read it, but I notice that the question is dependent more on what I know around which area. Think about it. Which area? Give yourself time. Pause here and think about it. I think you got it. I agree with you. It's purely knowledge based, but it's based on chapter 18, the work of others. So if you know that, it would be easy for you to actually get the right two questions. So that's a bit of section A. Let's move on to something else. But before we do so, probably you just wanted to stretch, reflect on what you've just seen. Pause, reflect, think. What has Roger just taken us through? Take some water, hydrate, stretch a bit. Maybe you should do this. And I know now once you've done this, we can do this. So let's move on. Great job. So what's the next thing? Section B. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So what's about this section B? Of course, we know if section A is 30%, I'm sure you can do the math and be able to guess the fact that maybe section B could be how many marks. Let's see. Now, the structure of section B requires us to particularly have three constructed response questions. It will be comprised of one 30-mark question and two 20-mark questions, all right? So, and I'm sure you can do the math there. 30 plus, if there are two 20-mark questions, that's about 70 marks. This is the only skills paper that has two sections. Now, what are the hot areas? Wait. Before we move there, probably I should mention something else. Predominantly, this thing is written response, so you must type as fast as Bolt's Hussein Bolt's world record. Dry joke alert. I should have told you that before. I'm sorry. But let's move on. Now, you notice something here. Though there might be some calculations that can be included, one for ratios, all right, and this usually helps, especially in the audit risk questions, or normally in the stages of audit at the audit planning stage, all right. It's a fantastic tool for risk assessment. And then two, we have your materiality, and we normally find computations of materiality, especially when we are dealing with the audit reports, just to try and see whether either an adjustment that is required is material or not, or an error that has been made is material or not. So you do appreciate the fact that you can get a bit more in terms of the benchmarks of materiality in your study hub in chapter 10. So go check that out. But predominantly this area, and here is the hot areas, are planning and risk assessment, internal controls, and audit evidence. And I have a fantastic secret, or let me say a fantastic thing for you after this. So if you could wait just little bit longer, there's something you might actually enjoy as we continue with this video. Now, fun fact, there is no credit available for listing the ACCA numbers, and as such, rote learning of ACCAs is not appropriate. Rather, an understanding of the key principles underlying auditing needs to be obtained and applied to the situation, all right? To the situation. Note that. Now, let's look at the time management. 30 marks usually will take about 54 minutes, the 30 mark question. The 20 mark question will take you about that 6 minutes. So if there are two 20 mark questions and one 30 mark question, well, you do appreciate the fact that the total time will be around 126 minutes. Please note this: as part of this planning process, candidates are also encouraged to read the requirement verb carefully in questions. If the requirement is to describe or explain, then detailed answer points should be produced. However, if the requirement is to list, then answer should contain brief points and should not stretch to pages of text. Just a short tip there. But let's move on. Now, you're in for a treat. I hope you guys are ready for this. I'm as excited really with what we're about to delve into, and I hope you will be as well. So far, so good. I hope if you're not, pause again, reflect. You're doing well. You've gotten this far. We're almost done. Now, let's look at something, the audit risk. We want to look at a question here. And here's my treat for you guys, okay? I want us to look at this. You told you're using the minutes provided. So within the scenario, and this is again from the specimen paper, I should look at the minutes. And you notice something, you told you describe. And we said here with description, you have to give more, isn't it? You're not told to list, you're told to describe. And describing basically means being able to explain, being able to bring out why an audit risk is an audit risk, or the identified risk you've picked out is an audit risk. So describe 7, not 6, not 8, okay, but 7. So I want us to also be very keen on that. Choose your best 7. All right, choose your best 7 from the scenario. There are times when you will find, or rather all the times you'll find, that the risks are more than 7, but choose your best 7 and explain the auditor's response to each risk. Now, what do you notice here? First, there are the minutes of the planning, and then we come to the identified risk in the scenario. And then what should I do next? Copy paste it, man. Copy paste it. All right, but copy paste with wisdom. If you were to read what I've highlighted there are actually 2 points there. So be able to separate them so that you don't end up missing out on key marks. All right, or you copy pasting the whole thing and not necessarily being able to appreciate the fact that there are 2 risks within what you've identified there. So be very careful. All right, now let's come to my next part. First and foremost, when you're identifying the risks, that's 0.5 marks. What should you notice here? Inventory is stored within 15 warehouses. Some are owned by Miller Company and some rented from the third parties. That was my risk. Fantastic. What should I do next? Explain the risk, not a business risk, an audit risk. Now, there are usually certain components we look at with audit risk. Either I could explain it through the components of audit risk, inherent, detection, control risk, or I could actually be able to look at it in the form of the financial statement area affected and the assertion impacted. So for instance, I could talk about receivables, or in this case inventory, and mention valuation. There could be a risk of valuation on inventory. There could be a risk of accuracy of inventory. There could be a risk of rights and obligation. Basically, the idea is to be able to touch on the assertions. Or the third way, which I usually find to be the most popular one, is being able to identify the area within the financial statement area impacted, and then being able to mention whether that is understated, overstated, or misstated. So for instance, we see here, only warehouses owned by Miller Company should be included within PPE. That's an objective. So what? If you stop there, you've still not told me why it's a risk. Fine, the objective might state that. Fine, the standard might dictate it. But what does that necessarily mean? So there's a risk of overstatement of PPE and understatement of rental expenses. Aha. If what happens? Well, if Miller Company has capitalized all 15 warehouses, now that makes sense. That makes sense. You see, you've told me there's a risk of, and look at this, the areas affected, PP, rental expenses, those are within the financial statements, and you've told me overstatement, understatement, fantastic. But you don't just stop there. You want to give context of why you think that. And you say that if Miller has capitalized all 15 warehouses, there's that risk of overstatement of PPE and understatement of rental expenses. Now, I want us to look at something here. Give the auditor's response. My, oh my. Let me first state this. The auditor's response is procedure, right? So you have to describe the process of what? Well, the process of how can I get more evidence as an auditor that the risk is there or not? So you've told me there's a risk of overstatement of PPA and understatement of rental expenses. How can I get more evidence as an auditor that the risk is there? How? How can I get more evidence that, of whether these guys have capitalized all 15 warehouses by mistake or by error? How can I be able to get more evidence about that? How do I know that they've done the right treatment, the right accounting treatment? Well, maybe I should obtain a detailed listing of all the warehouses, inspect the title deeds, the purchase agreements, or even lease contracts to confirm that they're owners. Okay, and then examine the accounting records to ensure that only owned warehouses are included in PP. Okay, then I haven't added this part, but what about the others? Well, you could verify that rental expenses for the leased warehouses are correctly recorded in the income statement, on the statement of profit or loss. So I could verify that rental expenses for the leased warehouses are correctly recorded in the statement of profit or loss. You see, I've already been able to separate because I've obtained the listing of all warehouses and I've been able to inspect their respective documents, the title deeds, the purchase agreements, the lease contracts. I'm able to know which ones are owned and which ones are not owned by them. And those ones that are owned by them should be capitalized, should be within PPE. While those that are not, those ones that are maybe leased, or the rental expenses, let me say for leased warehouses, can be recorded in the statement of profit or loss. And I should verify that. Right? So now that helps me to now know, have they done the right thing? Right? Let's move on to the next one, internal controls. Now, again from the specimen, and I want us to look at this. Here's the question. You're told here, in respect of the internal control of Baggio company, whichever you call it, you're told here, first and foremost, identify. So that means pinpoint from the scenario. And then the second thing is explain. So why do you think that's a deficiency? What could that result to? How does that affect the company? And then the second thing is recommend a control that will address that specific deficiency. So don't just give a recommendation that doesn't touch on anything there. Make it specific. And then the third thing, describe a test of control. That who? Suarez. Who is Suarez? Suarez is the auditor. It's the audit firm. So the tests of controls are done by the auditor. A lot of times I see students giving tests of controls as if it's the management of the client doing it, but it's not. It's not Baggio's management. It's the audit firm. It's the auditor himself, being who is actually doing this test of control. And you told you describe a test of control Suarez and company will perform to assess whether each of these controls, if implemented, which of these controls, the recommended controls. So you're testing the recommended controls. Remember that. So even when you're writing your question here, you need to think when you're giving your recommendation, also start to think of how you can test if it's working effectively. How can I confirm if it's there or not? Okay. How can I confirm that it's working effectively? The recommendation I've given. You have to think of that. All right. And of course, the total marks will be split equally. That means for a well identified and explained deficiency, 1 mark. Identifying is half a mark, explanation is a half a mark. Giving a recommendation is 1 mark. Giving an appropriate test of control is 1 mark. So if you give 6, those are 18 marks. My goodness. Now, why do I highlight that? What does that mean? 1st of July. Now, all questions, please note this, all questions follow a dating convention whereby the current date is set at 1st of July 2025. So you'll find so many papers in audit having this date. Now, this information will be stated in the question where relevant. All right. So if you notice with audit risk, I don't think we touched on it, but it can be relevant. It can be used. Now, year-end dates of the entity being audited will then be flexed appropriately around this. What do I mean? So let's say if you're doing a question on risk or planning, the entity could have a year-end of 31st of August 20x5. Because you see, if I'm in the planning stage as an auditor and it's 1st of July to date, it means that this is before the year end of the company. So the company's year end could be 31st of August while we are planning for the audit on 1st of July. All right. But if I'm dealing, let's say, with an audit evidence or an audit reporting question, the year end could be 31st of March 20x5. All right, where we now appreciate the fact that 31st of March 2025 is the year end, but you've now come because you've come after the year end on 1st of July. Okay, now this application of this consistent dating convention will allow a candidate to be able to quickly determine where they are in the audit process. So it's also, for instance, in this question, you realize it's 1st of July, but if you look at the company's year end, it's 30th of September. So you realize we are actually months before the year end, which means we are still within, the interim stage, all right, of the audit. We might be conducting an interim audit now. So let's move on. So that's what we call the dating convention. So there I've picked up one of my controls, I've identified it. Now the next thing is just put it there in the table. Once I've gotten all of them, I can now be able to put them in the table, arrange them appropriately well. Now, identifying the control deficiency and explaining the deficiency, as I told you, is 1 mark, 0.5, 0.5, right? But then I pick up this thing. Currently, the website is not integrated into the inventory system. All right, that's my identified control deficiency. I'll ask you, why is this a problem? And then you could tell me, this is a problem, Roger, because it can result in Baggio's company accepting customer orders when they do not have the goods in inventory. Oh my. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. I'm hearing you. Talk to me. Talk to me. And then I'll ask you, so how does that affect the company? And you can tell me this can cause them to lose sales. This can cause them to lose customer goodwill. I'll be like, now you've convinced me. You see, you've told me the fact that their website is not integrated into the inventory system means that these guys can accept customer orders on one end, but then they don't even have those goods in the inventory because customers could be placing orders, but you guys actually out of stock. My goodness. So that means that customers would actually be hoping for their goods to be delivered, but nothing comes through because you guys don't even have the goods. And that will affect your relationship with them. You see, so when you're able to explain why is this a problem, man, I'll give you zero point 0.5 marks for that. Then the control recommendation. Now, I give here one, just picking it up. The website should be updated to include an interface into the inventory system. This should check inventory levels and only process orders if adequate inventory is held. This is nice. So you want to create integration. All right, you want to ensure that the website is updated so that there's an interface into the inventory system, and this will always have the inventory levels being monitored so that even when an order is coming in, if the inventory is not adequate enough, the order will not be taken or will not be, processed. And I think that's good because the customer can actually be aware of the fact that early on that you guys do not have that particular product as of yet. Now, is this method cost beneficial and practical? I think it is. I think this is what you should ask yourself with a recommendation. Is it perfect? No. All right. I'm sure you guys could have come up with better answers, and that's good. But you have to note that for a controlled recommendation, it's a human creation, so it's not going to be 100% perfect. There are still going to be a few flaws. I'm sure you're already thinking of, man, I don't think that's a good point. I think I can give, another one, and that's fine. Give another one. But I'm giving also a recommendation that I know is beneficial. Cost for the business, it's cost beneficial, it's practical, it makes sense. And at the same time, as an auditor, and or if I was a student, what I would do is that I know I can test this thing easily. I can confirm that the website has been updated. How would I do that? Let's see. So please test your recommendation, new auditor. You guys can do it. You're doing it so well. Look at that. I need you to be able to know that the test of control is done by the auditor, not by the management. So let's try and understand, what does this mean? It means, can you be able to verify if this control is working effectively? How do we do this? I could put test data, put in a fake or dummy order just to try and see how the system processes the order. All right. And I can try to be able to order something that is out of stock so that I see whether the system is going to flag it as being out of stock or not. If it does this, then that means the system is working, and therefore the recommendation has been implemented, and therefore the control is working, and therefore we are happy. Now, let me ask you a last question. Are you tired? Man, I'm not that strong, as you can see. I'm trying. But anyway, you have room for one more area. Just one more. Let's touch on substantive procedures. All right. I hope you're learning. I hope you're enjoying ourselves. So look at this again. Describe the substantive procedures the auditor, okay, should perform to do what? Obtain sufficiency, appropriateness. All right. And you look at these definitions in chapter 15 in your study hub. Sufficiency, the aspect of quantity, appropriateness, relevance, and reliability, okay, in relation to the revaluation of land and buildings. All right. So I look at that, it's 6 marks. It means I need to give 6 very good points. That's what I need. 6 very good points. So I look at this and I say, okay, fine, fantastic. There it is. It's somewhere there, and I'm reading through it. So there's some few questions I have in my head. I'm told here, Very company has a policy of revaluing land and buildings. This is undertaken on a rolling basis over a 5-year period. During the year, Very company requested an external independent valuer to revalue a number of properties, including a warehouse purchased in October 2024. Depreciation is charged on a pro rata basis. So what am I thinking? A few things. Was the revaluation calculation done well? Is the valuer competent? Was depreciation computed pro rata correctly? Because they've mentioned that. Was the revaluation disclosed appropriately? Is there any relevant analytical procedures I can use to identify a trend? So just some of the questions. As you can see there, these 5 questions can give me 5 procedures or even 6. So I move on. And I could give this: verify the valuer's credentials, including their professional qualifications and membership in relevant professional bodies, to assess that the valuation work has been done credibly and accurately. Look at that. Fantastic point. Let me give another one. Obtain the asset register to verify the dates of acquisition and revaluation, and recalculate the depreciation based on these dates, and agree to what has been recorded as depreciation for the warehouse in the asset register. To do what? To ensure maybe accuracy. Okay, so what are the helpful tips that I have for you guys as we end? Well, first and foremost, what is the action done? Look at this thing. I use the word verify. I use the word obtain. I've used the recalculate. So use these wordings. What are you doing? Two, what is the document or individual you're performing the action on? If you're inspecting, what are you inspecting? If you're observing, what are you observing? If you're obtaining the board, what documents are you looking at? So as you can see there, I'm inspecting the title deed, I'm obtaining the board minutes, I'm inquiring from the finance manager. And then three, does the procedure have a flow? Okay, you see, if I stopped at, let's say this, obtain the asset register, what I wrote at the top there, to verify the dates of acquisition and revaluation and recalculate the depreciation based on these dates. And then I say there, to ensure accuracy. And it might not have ended. I've recalculated, but I need to see whether the amount I've come to is what they have recorded, to see if it's accurate. So if I just stop at recalculation and I've not even verified whether they have arrived at the same figure, I may not be able to have achieved the assertion that I'm trying to test. So let your procedure have flow. And then, what is the reason for the procedure? All right. Are you trying to test completeness? So many times the reason could be touching on the assertion. It could be touching on the assertion. And my friends, you have made it. I really hope that this was so beneficial for us. I've just tried to wrap up everything. I know you can do this. Listen to this video again and again. I'm sure that you're going to get it and you're actually going to excel in this paper. All the best.